In this set of notes, you're going to learn about parent function transformations. So we're going to start by looking at just a sample equation here. This is a quadratic equation that I've chosen for this example, but this is by no means limited to quadratic equations. This can be applied to any and all functions. So there are three categories of transformations we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about horizontal and vertical shifts, so moving the graph up, down, left, or right, picking up the whole graph and moving it one of those four directions. Then we have stretches and compressions, so that is just taking the ends of a graph and either stretching them up or down, or left or right, or compressing those ends together. And you can kind of think about this like a Play-Doh ball. You're either stretching it out to create a rope, or you're compressing it down to make a pancake. And then our third category are reflections, and that is just flipping the graph, the entire graph, either over the x-axis or the y-axis. So let's start with shifts to our graph, so moving our graph up, down, left, or right. This occurs when we add or subtract a number in our equation. So there are two kinds of shifts I mentioned earlier, horizontal shifts and vertical shifts. So horizontal shifts move the graph horizontally, so left or right, and that occurs when we add or subtract a number inside parentheses with the x. So this c value here is going to result in a horizontal shift, and this is going to move the graph either left or right. Okay, also from adding and subtracting, we get a vertical shift, moving the entire graph either up or down. And this occurs outside the parentheses, away from the x value. So this d value here at the end is going to result in a vertical shift. And this will move the graph up or down. As we move through the notes, we'll talk about what kind of numbers cause the graph to specifically move either to the left or the right, or up or down. So that's our first category. Second category of transformations is stretches and compressions. This comes from multiplying or dividing by a number in front of your variable or in front of the entire equation. So the a and b values here are acting as our multipliers. They will both result in a stretch or compression. Similar to the shifts, we have both horizontal and vertical stretches and compressions, just depending on where they sit in the equation. So this a value that's outside the parentheses, it's away from the x. We can see that that x is nestled in those parentheses. So when I talk about it being away from the x, that means it's outside those parentheses. So this a value is going to be a vertical stretch or compression. And it's vertical because it's away from the x, so that means it's affecting the y values, and the y-axis runs vertically on our graph. So it'll either be a stretch or a compression. You might also hear a compression referred to as a shrink, and they just mean the same thing. They're the same kind of transformation, just two different words. Then if we move that multiplier inside parentheses, we have a horizontal stretch or compression. And again, we'll talk about later in the notes what causes specifically it to be a stretch or a compression, both horizontally and vertically. And then our final category of transformations are reflections. And this comes from that negative sign, either being outside parentheses or inside parentheses. And that negative sign won't always be there, so there's not always a reflection. But I did place them in this equation here so you can see what it would look like if there was a reflection there. So when we have this negative outside parentheses, again, that is away from the x, so that is going to be a vertical reflection. Anything outside those parentheses is going to be a vertical change. Specifically, in this case, it's going to be a vertical reflection. And if we are reflecting our graph vertically up and down, that means we're flipping it over the x-axis. If we move that negative sign inside parentheses so that it is right in front of the x there, it's still a reflection, but this time it is a horizontal reflection. And if we are flipping our graph horizontally, now we're flipping it left and right across the y-axis. So over the y-axis. So these are the 6 transformations we're going to look at as we go through the notes, and we'll talk about specifically what causes each of them.